Wrestling fans. WrestleMachine is back with another one. July 19, 2010 Observer Newsletter. TNA and Heyman. Cain talks Lesnar, WWC Aniversario, Steamboat. By Observer staff. For the second straight month, in the days leading to the TNA pay-per-view, Dixie Carter started talking about an industry-changing surprise. Last month, she backed off at the end, and then tried to twist words saying she didn't mean it would be at the pay-per-view, but would be slowly obvious. And for the second straight month, there was no surprise, other than an ECW reunion angle people could clearly see coming. The surprise in question was an attempt to bring in Paul Heyman to book the company. Midweek, when Carter talked about how you would never guess who I'd just met with, she had actually just met with Heyman, and clearly, based on everything being said internally, they believed a deal was imminent. Jeff Jarrett even began giving hints about the identity of a new person coming in. The plan was for Heyman to arrive as the leader of the ECW contingent on the pay-per-view, but Heyman stated a week before at UFC 116 when he said that wasn't happening, it didn't happen. The game is still in play, and there are two major impasses involved. The first is that Heyman doesn't believe a booking change alone can turn TNA around, and he doesn't want to be a part of failure. He already turned down both the IFL and Yama promotions when they wanted his involvement, and probably could have hooked up a consulting job with WWE if he wanted to stay in the business. He wants the power to bring in his own crew, both wrestlers and front office, but was not offered that power. TNA is in many ways the most unique wrestling company ever. It has lost tens of millions since its inception, although did have break-even and even profitable years in 2008 and 2009 before spending got out of control this year in an attempt at expansion that backfired. But company president Dixie Carter has a lot of loyalties to some people. The company has fired people to cut costs in recent months, so the stories she doesn't want anyone fired aren't true. Some are perplexing, like Christopher Daniels coming off a string of good main events, and nobody could even get answers as to who made the call or why. But others are sacred cows, such as Vince Russo, just as an example. Heyman has said that if he is going to come in, he wants to be in the position the Fertitta brothers put Dana White in when they bought UFC in 2001, with the ability to succeed or fail on his own. He wants to hire his own crew both because he's not impressed with many on the office staff or the results TNA has, and, if he brings in his own people, those people will be loyal to him, and not to Jeff Jarrett, or Eric Bischoff, or whoever got them in, and won't politically undermine him in an attempt to get him out of power. There's no guarantee he can turn it around, and it may not be possible to put big numbers on the board for pro wrestling if you aren't WWE today. There are a lot of different ways you can interpret his run as the person in charge of ECW. It was successful in some ways, but ultimately it went out of business. It didn't lose money at nearly the rate TNA did, and even with far less talent, less money, and far less television support, created a product that did the same ratings, and did far better on pay-per-view. He also gave careers to a number of wrestlers who would have never had a shot at making it in wrestling otherwise, and made them popular enough to where they became major favorites even after leaving ECW, something TNA has never been able to do with anyone homegrown. Of course, it also was around during a period when pro wrestling was far more popular, but also had the disadvantage of competing against two national companies with far more exposure, instead of one, although the reality is TNA is also competing against even stronger companies than ECW ever had to contend with. It was also during a period where there were a lot of concepts of pro wrestling that were being done well around the world, but not in the US, to draw from. And ECW was kind of a melting pot of those ideas. There were also a lot of American wrestlers who became stars internationally but weren't signed to the major promotions. Today the styles aren't new, and the 90s concepts have been repeated to death and are overdone. Most agree for TNA to make it they can't be like WWE, even though they come across as the low-rent second-rate version of WWE much of the time. You can say nobody has been able to come up with another viable concept for pro wrestling, but it's also a different era. The fans of the past are gone and probably aren't coming back. A lot of the icons made in the 80s had great staying power in the 90s. But the 90s icons, the Hogan, Piper, Savage, Flair and Road Warriors of that era, which were the aging names that brought back an old fan base to ECW, guys like Austin, Rock, and Bill Goldberg, moved out of wrestling. In addition, the setting of 90s WCW television was more first-class than 80s television. The setting of TNA television simply can't match the atmosphere of the traveling Nitro shows. And wrestling simply isn't in, although you could make the point wrestling was even more down and out in 1995 than in 2010. Heyman also, in wanting to be in the Dana White role, wants ownership points in the company. He made clear his goal, which would be to make the company viable, increase its market share and eventually have points in a company that does an IPO, which is how the McMahon family went from being wealthy to filthy rich. Heyman has talked with a number of people with the idea of bringing them in if he gets power, so he's at least very much entertaining the idea that he would come in. Flying to Nashville showed interest, and enough that people in TNA were claiming they had a deal almost completed, even though the fact was money terms had never even been discussed. TNA's idea was to bring Heyman in as the head of creative, with Vince Russo moving to a role in television production. They wanted to have an ECW faction where Heyman would be the on-camera leader, a role he seems to have little interest in. Even before this week, those with knowledge of the negotiations said Heyman made it clear he didn't want to be a television character, but was open to doing one TV appearance just to make it clear he was coming. Heyman, on the other hand, said he was not in favor of the ECW angle, feeling TNA's big problem was the idea it's a promotion out of touch and with an aging roster. Bringing in the ECW cast of the 90s is not a way to build the future, and if Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair didn't have legs, most likely this concept may pull ratings up for a few weeks, possibly deliver a buy rate above the usual anemic levels, but it's not curing any problems. Whoever is in charge of TNA needs a 3 to 5 year plan. The key is extensive scouting and recruiting, a developmental program which in a best-case scenario would include experienced workers working with the younger talent and teaching them hands-on in the ring in front of paying customers, and in different types of settings. The problem with the current regime is they were living in the past and not preparing for the future. On July 12, TNA shot the ECW angle, but instead of Heyman as the main person, it became Mick Foley and Tommy Dreamer. The next night they announced that the August 8 Hard Justice pay-per-view would be similar to the 2005 ECW One Night Stand show. As a one-time deal, there's nothing wrong with it. It should do considerably better than anything TNA would put on could do at this time. But it solves none of the problems, and even if successful for a night, may dig the hole deeper because it perpetuates to feeling to onlookers that this is the home of aging guys that were WWE discards. The ECW angle started with Abyss and Rob Van Dam coming to the ring, and Abyss said it's time to reveal the big secret about how they are going to take over TNA, and there's nothing Dixie Carter could do about it. But Van Dam turned on Abyss and laid him out with a belt shot. Abyss made a comeback on Van Dam, and went to use the board with nails until Jesse Neal and Shannon Moore came out, but Abyss laid both out. Mick Foley came out and Dreamer, Raven, Stevie Richards and Rhino all attacked and laid out Abyss. Security came out, but the ECW contingent laid them out. The first round of wrestlers ran in like Douglas Williams, Kazuchika Okada, and Magnus, but they were left laying. Brian Kendrick and Desmond Wolfe were the next sacrifices. Pat Kenny, now as Simon Diamond, and Al Snow joined the ECW group, since both were ECW characters. This led to TNA's other agents, D'Lo Brown and Terry Taylor, coming out and getting beaten up. Jay Lethal and Matt Morgan ran in and were next to be beaten down. Devin ran down, but joined the ECW group. Bubba Ray Dudley did not join the ECW group, and actually was involved with Dreamer, who it is believed suffered a knee tear in the angle when he landed badly as he was knocked off the stage by Bubba. Jeff Jarrett came out and they also beat him up. Carter came out and made it clear she invited them, but another brawl continued. It was a wild scene that Dreamer and Carter on the next night's television came out together, and Dreamer said it wasn't an invasion, but they were all working with TNA. When the dust cleared, the ECW group was Foley, Raven, Richards, Rhino, Dreamer, RVD, Simon Diamond, Devin, and Snow. Putting Foley and Dreamer as the focal points and shooting the angle without Heyman seemed to indicate they are at least going with the idea he's not coming in. While all this was going on, neither Hulk Hogan nor Bischoff were at television. Hogan was against Heyman coming in. Bischoff claimed days earlier that he was putting family in front of business this week, but would return at the next set of tapings. During the Victory Road pay-per-view, their names were only mentioned in passing. Hogan had another back operation and there is talk that he's not going to wrestle again, so the long-planned matches with Abyss at Bound for Glory in October, and later with Sting, are off the books. When Brock Lesnar was on his back getting pounded on by Shane Carwin in the early part of their heavyweight title match on July 3, some people saw it as the visual proof the powerhouse heavyweight champion had a major weakness that was now exposed. For example, Lesnar's most famous rival, former champion Frank Mir, bidding for a rubber match, went to the gym the next day, dissecting the tape, while he and his partners talked about how they now knew Mir could knock Lesnar out if a third meeting could be arranged. But Lesnar's next opponent, Cain Velasquez, 8-0, who gets his title shot on October 23 at the Honda Center in Anaheim, was at ringside and didn't interpret what was happening that way. "I think it showed what kind of a champion Brock really is," said the soft-spoken Velasquez. "I feel he's proved a lot. The way he came back, what it shows is that the next time, the referee isn't going to be quick to stop the fight." Unlike Lesnar's previous opponents, Velasquez isn't predicting either a quick or an easy fight, saying he's both preparing and expecting the fight to go the full 5 rounds. Velasquez, whose background is very similar to Lesnar's, has nothing negative to say about the champion. You aren't going to hear mocking remarks about how this isn't fake, referring to Lesnar's pro wrestling background, or mocking the less refined aspects of Lesnar's MMA game. There's going to be no questioning of his character, no sound bites of how if he taps Lesnar on his chin that Lesnar will go out, or claims Lesnar doesn't have the character to be a true champion. Velasquez isn't questioning Lesnar's heart, his conditioning, his mental toughness, nor his durability. His thoughts on the fight are simple. He's going to the gym and working hard every time, ramping up the workouts in the last 2 months and working on a game plan. He expects the key to his game will revolve around constant movement. I can't just stand there in front of him with no movement and let him explode for a double leg takedown, he said. A long back and forth war is the most likely scenario. While Velasquez put Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira's lights out in his last fight, he doesn't have the punching power of Carwin. Velasquez is also unlikely to fade like Carwin did, nor leave himself open for a submission. Neither man will be easy to finish early and late, because Lesnar sweats enormously. Getting a submission will only be more difficult. Velasquez expects to be working constantly with high-level wrestlers between now and then. Daniel Cormier, who is on the 2004 and 2008 Olympic teams, trains at the gym, and through his connections with the Olympic team, they expect to bring in the top level of wrestlers in the country. Mark Ellis, the 2009 NCAA heavyweight champion, has been in camp. Elite wrestling is going to be heavily focused on in the gym, because not only does wrestling look to be the key in this fight, but also in teammate Josh Koscheck's welterweight title challenge to Georges St. Pierre in December. The wrestling is going to be a big part of it, he said. He's primarily a wrestler and I come from a wrestling background. But the fight will come down to everything. I expect there will be boxing, jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, and wrestling. There is also the difference in that neither man has ever fought past the 3-round mark. Velasquez went the distance against Czech Congo, dominating 90% of the fight on the ground. Lesnar had similar results in his only match that went the distance, an even more one-sided win over Heath Herring. You have to do the time, 5 rounds, in the gym, he said. I'm going to be doing 5 rounds every time I spar, twice a week in the weeks leading to the fight. Lesnar and Velasquez both grew up and developed strength and mental toughness working on farms from a young age. Both wrestled from childhood. Velasquez was the better high school wrestler of the two, winning 2 state titles in Arizona. Both won a junior college national title, and placed twice in the NCAAs, but Lesnar's record in college was better than Velasquez's. Both had similar mentalities about wrestling, and somewhat burned out on the sport at the end of college, neither opting to try for the Olympic team. Velasquez's coach Ham Ortiz noted that Velasquez during his senior year had already talked of wanting to get into MMA, and that mentality he saw a wrestling match as a fight, and was frustrated at points that so many tactics he mentally would want to do weren't allowed in the sport, making him a natural for MMA. Lesnar, before MMA became popular, used to talk about his wrestling matches as the closest thing to a legalized fight. While both have similarities in background, and both started training for MMA in 2006, Velasquez a few months before Lesnar, they are altogether different as both fighters and personalities. Velasquez, as a small heavyweight, took to the sport quicker from a technical standpoint. He had the wrestling and conditioning from day one. He won a blue belt world championship in jiu-jitsu barely a year after his first lesson. His striking showed holes against Czech Congo, where he was rocked hard 3 times, but recovered immediately and used his wrestling to immediately get out of trouble each time. But in his most recent fight, a knockout win over the legendary Nogueira on February 21st, in Sydney, Australia, he showed a disciplined and controlled offensive punches and kicks standing, and far stronger defense. Lesnar relies more on his physical gifts, power, explosiveness, and ridiculous speed for someone so large. Velasquez turns 28 on July 28, while Lesnar turned 33 on July 12. Even though Lesnar's time at his physical peak is ticking, he's likely to improve based on picking up new skills and is likely a couple of years away from his peak as a competitor. Velasquez, with barely 4 years of training in the sport and at his age, is even more likely to be a few years away from his peak. Velasquez, who weighed 242 against Nogueira, expects to be about 245 pounds come fight time, which would mean he'll give up around 25 pounds in the cage. Unlike Lesnar's previous opponents, Mir and Carwin, he's not looking at adding bulk to try and compete with Lesnar's power. If I get too big, I'll be sacrificing speed, he said. Lesnar agreed to the date on Friday afternoon, in what will be, along with the St. Pierre vs. Koscheck bout, as the two biggest fights left on the 2010 calendar. While a lot of the sports insiders have tabbed Velasquez, who has never lost a round in competition, as the best of the new generation of heavyweights, Lesnar opened as a slight 9-8 favorite. The build to the fight is likely to be very different from the normal bombastic sound bites that Lesnar and most of his opponents have given en route to Lesnar's career average of about 1 million buys per pay-per-view appearance. If there is any trash talk, it will likely come from the Lesnar side. Velasquez may have gotten the moniker of the monster in the gym years back when his trainer Javier Mendez and fellow fighters at the San Jose, California-based American Kickboxing Academy started talking about him as a future heavyweight champion, but he's a quiet monster who doesn't talk big. It's others who tell the stories of him dominating big names in the gym, talking about his skill set and his endless cardio. Of his vaunted cardio that training partner Herschel Walker shakes his head and says is best of any athlete he has ever been around, Velasquez plays it down. He said he gets tired just like everyone else, well, maybe not as fast, but learned it at a young age doing menial labor to mentally fight his way through it. In college, I felt the guys were as strong as I was for the first half of the first round, he said. But by the second round, there was a difference, and by the third round I felt a lot stronger. Lesnar had a similar reputation for conditioning as a college wrestler at the University of Minnesota. People looking at his hulking upper body and smiling, figuring those big muscles need oxygen, and his tongue would be hanging out after a few minutes of MMA competition have been left disappointed thus far. I'm going to have to follow the game plan to perfection, said Velasquez. Pro Wrestling Noah, just a few years ago one of the model wrestling promotions on the planet, continued its slide when a loaded lineup for its 10th anniversary show drew just 5,300 fans to the Ariake Coliseum in Tokyo on July 10, the smallest major arena show crowd in company history. The show was the first since the company gave up the ghost of attempting to promote at Budokan Hall in Tokyo after the February 28 and May 2 shows both did about 8,000 fans, about half full. The idea seemed to be that they could run the Coliseum closer to their different Ariake home base, and it would be a better atmosphere because it's a smaller arena. However, it appears that Budokan Hall itself as the classic big show arena is a draw in and of itself, as it's more centrally located in Tokyo and fans have been going there for shows for decades. The Ariake Coliseum has had successful pro wrestling events over the years, including for the Noah promotion in its early days, but this is a different era. The lineup was strong on paper when it came to depth, including 2 New Japan vs. Noah matches, a feud that has drawn decently well of late, and the anniversary show itself should have been of some significance. The show was also being taped for Noah's one-time return to network television. But the main event, with Takashi Sugiura retaining the GHC title against Yoshihiro Takayama, seems to also indicate that as good as Sugiura's match quality may be, his name isn't strong enough to draw on top as champion, which has been the case for most of Noah's champions that didn't come from the era when pro wrestling was big. His most recent defense against New Japan's Togi Makabe, before Makabe won the IWGP title, the two only did a half-house at Budokan Hall on February 28 with an undercard that included Toshiaki Kawada and Minoru Suzuki. The fall of the company's popularity can be traced to 2 things: the loss of NTV weekly coverage at the end of the 2008-2009 television season due to financial cutbacks in NTV, and the combination of the death of Mitsuharu Misawa and the injuries keeping Kenta Kobashi out of action. The loss of TV both hurt in exposure as well as the money needed to make payroll, forcing cutbacks. Even though they were past their prime, Misawa and Kobashi were by far the biggest stars when it came to the live shows, particularly the big shows drew based on whether Kobashi, and to a lesser extent Misawa, were in an interesting match, and this dates back for most of the past decade. At its peak in the earlier part of the last decade, at times they were arguably the best promotion in the world, winning Promotion of the Year in 2004 and 2005, and Best Television Show in 2003. The company's peak, the Kobashi GHC title run, may have been the most impressive title run in years, going 2 years and having one classic match after another, and during that period they only twice didn't fill Budokan Hall for the big shows. The people who were there were hot for everything on the show, and it was reported as a very good show overall, both good matches and a great atmosphere. I was told except for the attendance, there is little negative you could say about the show. People were very surprised seeing the crowd, and the explanations were either that is simply what you have to accept because pro wrestling isn't a big deal in Japan now, and others noted that Dream had a huge show the same night in Saitama. But it was quickly pointed out that huge MMA shows have gone the same night as big pro wrestling events in the past, and that both have drawn well and the two draw different types of audiences, as MMA draws the 20s crowd. The 90s fans of Misawa and Kobashi are gone. Some will probably come back when Kobashi returns for his first time back in a few months, but it won't sustain. They announced a return date to the Ariake Coliseum on August 22, headlined by Sugiura defending the title against Jun Akiyama. NTV announced that it would air a 90-minute special on the 10th anniversary of the promotion on August 14, with the matches taped on this show. It will be the first time Noah appeared on the network in 16 and a half months. 1. Shuhei Taniguchi and Atsushi Aoki beat Akira Tao and Masato Inoue when Taniguchi pinned Inoue with a German suplex in 10:43. Tao and Inoue work as an opening match act because they are similar to the old Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura aging former stars tag team, and Noah really is the extension of Baba Pro Wrestling. 2. Bison Smith and Keith Walker and Ricky Marvin and Taiji Ishimori beat Akitoshi Saito and Genva Hiranagi and Muhammad Yone and Kentaro Shiga in 11:53 when Smith pinned Hiranagi after a powerbomb in the Bicentennial Styles Clash. 3. Kensuke Sasaki and Katsuhiko Nakajima and Yoshinari Ogawa beat Jun Akiyama and Takuma Sano and Makoto Hashi in 15:42 when Nakajima pinned Hashi with an enzouidori. 4. Prince Devitt and Ryusuke Taguchi, the former IWGP Junior Tag Team Champions from New Japan, defeated Kenta and Eddie Edwards in a great match in 14:13 when Taguchi pinned Edwards after the Double Team Black Hole Vacation. Very physical, great heat, and Edwards came across as a star in Japan in being part of this company. 5. In the Battle of the Bulge, Takeshi Morishima, billed at 352 pounds, pinned Yutaka Yoshi, billed at 335 pounds, in 16:09 after 3 lariats and a backdrop driver. It was reported as a real good big man style match. 6. Yoshinobu Kanemaru retained the GHC Junior title pinning Namichi Marufuji in 23:20. A very good match which saw both men survive being powerbombed on the ring apron and nearly counted out. Kanemaru got the pin after 3 brainbusters. Said to be very creative, with a lot of moves and sequences that people hadn't seen before, but perhaps too creative in spots. 7. Go Shiozaki pinned Hiroshi Tanahashi in 2011 with a lariat and the Go Flasher. Even though Tanahashi is really New Japan's top star right now, this result made sense. The New Japan team won in the earlier tag match. Plus, Tanahashi pinned Shiozaki in their first meeting earlier this year at the Tokyo Dome. Said to be a great match. However, Shiozaki did a moonsault where he landed with a knee across Tanahashi's throat. Tanahashi continued to the finish, but later that night, was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. 8. Takashi Sugiura retained the GHC heavyweight title pinning Yoshihiro Takayama in 15:49 after an Olympic slam. Match was said to be better than you'd think. TNA's latest pay-per-view offering, Victory Road on July 11 from Orlando, was the latest in the pattern of average shows. The show had some strong matches, but just as many weak ones, including a subpar main event that the crowd wasn't into. The crowd was up and down, but seemingly burned out by the main event. Booking a 4-way weeks after WWE had just built a pay-per-view around the concept came across as second-rate, and more importantly, the match felt like something nobody really cared about. Plus the dynamic of 3 faces against 1 heel is difficult for a match to overcome. The show drew the usual full house of 1,100 fans to the Impact Zone, with about 100 more turned away. There were 2 title changes. First, Angelina Love beat Madison Rayne via DQ in a finish that was beyond perplexing. 2 days later it was announced at the tapings that Love had to give the title back due to an incorrect ruling by the referee. The Motor City Machine Guns won the vacant tag team titles beating Beer Money. The 2 teams are now doing a best-of-5 series that will conclude at the August 8 Hard Justice pay-per-view, or at least was originally set that way. 1. Douglas Williams retained the X title beating Brian Kendrick in 10:03 in a combination Ultimate X and submission rules match. The match didn't seem to click. The Ultimate X cables were only used once, at the finish. They did a gimmick from TV where Williams was afraid of heights, which came off so lame it badly hurt the match. Early, Williams started climbing, got scared, and came down. Kendrick kept going for the Cobra Clutch but Williams would escape. Kendrick climbed but Williams came after him and brought him back to the ring with a backward superplex. Kendrick went for the Cobra Clutch again. Williams made the ropes and Kendrick held on until Williams fell off the ramp. Williams put on climbing gloves and I guess they also eliminated fear. After slapping Kendrick with the glove, he put them on, climbed to the top and used the cable. Kendrick was right behind him. Kendrick went for a Cobra Clutch while both were hanging from the cable. They lost balance and both came tumbling down. They sold it that Kendrick was knocked out from the fall. Williams then put on the Cobra Clutch and the ref checked Kendrick's hand 3 times, it was limp, and it was stopped even though Kendrick didn't submit. 2 stars. 2. Brother Ray beat Brother Devin and Jesse Neal in 5:55. Bubba did a big interview before the match telling Christy Ham that Jesse is a failure, just like your edition of Playboy. Back to the Russo woman hating interview verbiage with Ed Ferrara no longer scripting interviews. Ray also said that without him, Devin was nothing and would have never survived in the industry. Honestly, that's probably true. Bubba attacked Neil as he was coming to the ring. Devin's music played, but he never came out. A cameraman showed the door was locked from the outside and Devin couldn't get out. Of course it's backstage, everyone knew it, there is a camera guy there, and they just keep him locked in for several minutes. Dreamer, Rhino, Raven and Richards came out and the crowd was chanting ECW. Bubba was distracted and Neil speared him for a near fall. Bubba brought in a chair. Shannon Moore came out. This distracted ref Slick Johnson and Bubba hit Neil in the back with a chair. Devin finally arrived at the 4:50 mark of the match. He and Bubba did a stare down. They did a double swerve. First they teased they were going to go at it but didn't. Then they teased they were going to double team Neil. Then Bubba attacked Devin, and Devin fought back. Neil went to spear Bubba, who moved, and Neil speared Devin. Bubba then pinned Neil after a Bubba bomb. 1 star. 3. Angelina Love beat Madison Rayne via DQ in 4:40 in a match where Love put up her career. Rayne put up the Knockouts title, and also if there was outside interference by the beautiful people, there would be an immediate DQ and forfeiture of the title. Rayne grabbed the chair that SoCal Val was sitting in. Before she could use it, Love kicked the chair in Rayne's face. The mystery biker chick Tara came out and threw Love into the post and then threw down ref Andrew Thomas. Thomas ordered a DQ, and claiming that since it was due to interference, per the pre-match stip, Love was the new champion. What made even less sense is Rayne and the biker chick left together, even though the biker chick had just cost her the match and title. A nothing much with a terrible nonsensical ending. 1/4 star. 4. AJ Styles and Kazarian beat Rob Terry and Samoa Joe in 8:08. The action was real good whenever Joe was in the match. It wasn't terrible when Terry was in, but when Joe would tag Terry in, the crowd was boo. Terry threw both guys over the top rope, and tagged Joe, who did a tope, nailing both guys on the floor. Joe ended up being worked over for a few minutes. He used a urinage on Styles, had tagged Terry. Terry sold nothing and pressed Styles and threw him halfway across the ring. Terry used a suplex into a power slam on Styles for a near fall, as Kazarian saved. Joe tagged in and was about to give Styles a muscle buster when Wolf came out and pulled Joe to the floor. Terry clotheslined Wolf, but Styles used a springboard forearm to Terry. Kazarian followed with a springboard dropkick and a springboard leg drop. Styles tagged in and did a springboard 450 for the pin. After the match, Joe laid out Wolf by giving him a muscle buster. 3 stars. 5. Hernandez beat Matt Morgan in a cage match in 10:43. Hernandez crotched Morgan on the top rope and hit a springboard dropkick. Hernandez nailed Morgan too with body blocks, knocking Morgan into the cage. Hernandez missed a tackle and flew into the cage. Morgan, whose back was bleeding by this point, then threw Hernandez 3 times into the cage. Morgan nailed Hernandez with the carbon footprint. Morgan showed he could leave, was just about out the door, but decided to come back in and deliver more punishment. Hernandez was bleeding. Morgan kicked Hernandez's face into the cage and scraped his ace on the cage and kicked his head into the cage. Morgan was punching the cut. Hernandez came back, and twice went for the border toss, and Morgan was so big and long, Hernandez couldn't get him up. The second time they both fell down trying the move, and Hernandez was clearly not happy. But he still laid Morgan out and climbed to the top of the cage. He went for a splash, but missed, as Morgan moved. Morgan then pulled out handcuffs he had hidden in his t-shirt. He handcuffed Hernandez into the ropes. Morgan, instead of going out the door right in front of him, he decided to climb to the top. At least he wasn't afraid of heights. Hernandez broke the handcuffs. He then did a running shoulder block into the door, which flew open, and Hernandez was on the ramp before Morgan could climb over. 1 3/4 stars. 6. Jay Lethal beat Ric Flair in 12:03 with the figure 4 leg lock. Solid match. Flair looked old and ridiculously tanned in there, but could do enough of his bumps and even minus blood, had a good match. Crowd went wild when he did the face first bump. Lethal gave Flair a top rope superplex, but missed the follow-up moonsault. Flair started working on the legs with a figure 4 leg lock, but ref Earl Heckner caught him holding the opes for leverage. Lethal used a schoolboy for a near fall. Later Lethal used Flair's flip into the corner move and landed on his feet. Flair, who hasn't done the move in years, acted all mad. Lethal went for a sunset flip and Flair blocked it, and Lethal pulled down Flair's trunks for a pop. Lethal used a crossbody off the top, a reverse splash onto Flair's knees and the figure 4. Flair tapped out, and then Lethal in the ring started crying because Flair put him over clean. This wasn't at the level of Flair's best matches of 2007 or 2008, but better than most of what was on the card. 2 3/4 stars. 6. Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley beat Robert Roode and James Storm in 15:55 to win the vacant tag team titles. This was the highlight of the show. Crowd was quiet early following the strong reactions to the Flair match, but eventually they got the crowd back. Shelley was worked over and Sabin hot tagged in, using a tornado DDT on Roode and punting Storm's head on the apron. Shelley used a Shiranui on Roode but Storm saved. Storm used a hot shot on Shelley. Sabin used a Hurricane Rana on Storm, and went for it on Roode but was blocked. Storm used the Eye of the Storm, Whirlybird, on Sabin for a near fall. Shelley gave Storm the codebreaker and Roode went for the pin on Shelley, who kicked out. The crowd got into it there. Sabin did a Silver King-style dive onto Storm on the floor, and Roode did a plancha on Sabin. Shelley then did a tope on Roode. Crowd was really hot. Storm spit beer into ref Brian Heckner's eyes when Sabin ducked. They did a double team move where Sabin did a neckbreaker on Roode while Storm came off for a crossbody at the same time. Earl Heckner ran into ref and counted a pin, but Roode kicked out. Sabin used a tope on Storm. Shelley used a crossbody on Roode, who rolled through for a near fall. Shelley did a series of slaps to Roode's face. Shelley pinned Roode while Storm pinned Sabin, and each Heckner counted 3 and the match ended. Brian and Earl started arguing about who won. Earl then ordered a restart. Less than a minute into the restart, Shelley superkicked Roode and gave a backstabber to Storm. Sabin then gave Roode a neckbreaker at the same time Shelley came off the top with a crossbody and Sabin pinned Roode. 4 stars. 7. Kurt Angle pinned Pope D'Angelo Dinero in 12:05. Same thing as the prior match where crowd wasn't into it early coming off the prior hot match. A second handicap was the Stips as Angle said he would retire if he lost. Yes, they had 2 retirement Stips on the same show, amazing considering nobody believes retirement Stips. Because of that, nobody bought Dinero as having a chance, which hurt the heat. Angle used a belly-to-belly overhead suplex which woke up the crowd. Pope used a vertical suplex, followed by a German suplex, and then an STO for a near fall. Pope missed his double knees in the corner. Angle came back with 3 German suplexes. Later, when Pope recovered, he went to the top, but Angle climbed to the top rope and threw him off with a belly-to-belly superplex. Angle spent the next few minutes working around the ankle lock. Dinero used a codebreaker and nobody bought the near fall. Angle used an Olympic slam out of the corner or a near fall. Finish saw Pope go for a sunset flip, and Angle blocked it and grabbed the ankle lock in the middle, and Pope tapped. 3 stars half. 8. Rob Van Dam retained the TNA title in a 4-way over Jeff Hardy, Abyss and Mr. Anderson in 12:27. Match was flat. They had trouble following the ending of the prior match, but never got the crowd. Hardy looked bad, sloppy and like he didn't care. The dynamic with the 3 faces didn't work and people didn't really care about Anderson. If it wasn't for Van Dam, the match would have been pretty bad. Hardy did a flip dive off Van Dam's back onto Abyss. Anderson dropped down for Hardy to jump onto his back for a dive, but then got up and body blocked Hardy and went for a pin, but RVD saved. RVD did a dive over the top onto Abyss. Crowd was deathly quiet here. RVD used a split-legged moonsault on Anderson but Hardy saved. Great spin kick by RVD on Hardy. There was a Tower of Doom spot where Abyss threw everyone off the ropes. RVD used a rider kick off the top onto Abyss. He went to the top for the frog splash but Anderson shoved him off the rope. RVD crashed onto his ramp in falling. Hardy started punching Anderson but the punches looked like crap. Crowd at this point stopped reacting to Anderson. He used the mic check on Abyss, to no reaction, and Hardy saved. Abyss with a black hole slam on Hardy. Anderson pulled ref Brian Heckner out of the ring so he couldn't count the fall. Hardy and Anderson traded moves, looking sloppy. Hardy finally hit the twist of fate on Anderson and went to the top. Finish saw Hardy hit Anderson with the swanton but Abyss choke slammed Hardy right on top of Anderson and covered. RVD then came off the top rope with a frog splash onto Abyss back. With everyone down, RVD covered Anderson for the pin. Abyss then attacked RVD after the match and was putting the boots to him. He pulled out the 2x4 board with nails and pointed to RVD. RVD rolled out of the ring and that was it. 2 stars. To some, the long-awaited Shinya Aoki vs. Tatsuya Kawajiri match on July 10th was the symbolic end of something that, in reality, had ended 3 years earlier. Just as Pride was going down, Aoki had become the rising lightweight star when he finished Joachim Hansen with a Gogo Plata on the 2006 New Year's Eve show. Kawajiri established himself in being the guy in exciting fights and losses to the likes of Takanori Gomi, when Gomi was number 1 in Japan in the division, and to Eddie Alvarez, both in Fight of the Year candidates. With Dream being formed, the two had become the Japanese stars of the division, but a matchup continually was delayed. Because of that, the turnout of 10,000, announced at 13,028, but with the entire top deck curtained off and the lower section not full, no way that was possible, at the Saitama Super Arena was a disappointment, although Aoki vs Kawajiri had nothing for support, as it felt like a show just thrown together outside of the main event. When it was over, with Aoki victorious, he recognized it, saying that this was the end of Pride. Aoki snatched Kawajiri's heel on the ground 18 seconds into the match and twisting, turning and cranking until Kawajiri, long past injured, finally tapped at 153. The win didn't do much for Japanese MMA, as the hope was for Kawajiri to capture the title, and then face Gilbert Melendez, who dominated Aoki in a 5-round decision on April 17 in Nashville. The idea that Kawajiri stylistically would fare better against Melendez would return Japanese pride, as one of the reasons interest is down, as fans can see that their Japanese stars are not strong when put on the worldwide stage. Dream 15 was what I'd call a normal show. The main event seemed strong for Japan, but only emphasized how far past its peak Japanese MMA is when even the Dream match from the past didn't do well. The show had its issues in its final days relating to the light heavyweight title tournament, as well as the group's top heavyweight, Alistair Overeem. Overeem had been advertised on the show from the start, although he had vacationed in San Jose and Hawaii in recent weeks. He was first asked about facing Andrei Arlovsky in a match that would create the first Dream heavyweight champion, giving him a shot at being a dual promotion world champion. That fell through. They also attempted to get Tim Sylvia and Minowa Man, and finally Rico Rodriguez to face Overeem. Dream signed a contract with Rodriguez for the fight, although Overeem's camp said he wasn't coming. Rodriguez, who arrived at 230 pounds and in his best shape since before he was UFC heavyweight champion, was even flown to Japan and not told until Thursday night that he wasn't fighting. At the last minute they tried to get Minowa Man and Kazuyuki Fujita for Rodriguez, and neither would accept on such short notice. And at weigh-ins, another issue transpired. Jake O'Brien, scheduled to face Shigeru Musashi in one of the semifinals to create a Dream light heavyweight champion, weighed in at 226 pounds for a fight contracted at 205. O'Brien, who fought most of his career as a heavyweight before dropping to light heavyweight in UFC, also showed up looking out of shape. The Japanese ordered him to start cutting, and he got to 212 when doctors waved off his cut, saying any more weight would be unhealthy. Rodriguez even talked about dropping 25 pounds to 205 and taking his place after O'Brien weighed in so heavy. Instead, they allowed the match to continue as a tournament match, ordered O'Brien to pay Musashi 10% of his purse, and gave O'Brien a yellow card at the start of the fight. The weight cut so late could have played a factor in a long fight, but didn't, since O'Brien ended up losing to a standing guillotine in only 31 seconds. Dream was building Musashi vs Melvin Manhoef for its title. Manhoef, a charismatic heavy hitter who is a big favorite, ended up being upset by Tatsuya Mizuno in what was the night's most exciting fight, setting up Mizuno vs Musashi for the title on the next Dream show on September 25 in Nagoya. Aoki, after his win, said he was going to face Melendez on that show, but Scott Coker of Strikeforce confirms the fight is not scheduled nor happening, as Melendez is still recovering from a broken hand. During intermission, Uno did an interview, saying he was returning and dropping to featherweight. Featherweight may end up as the marquee division here, with the addition of Michihiro Amagawa and Uno, along with Mitsuhiro Ishida dropping, as well as Hideo Tokoro, Kid Yamamoto, Hiroyuki Takaya, Joachim Hansen, Yoshiro Maeda, and others, all chasing champion Bibiano Fernandez. Uno is scheduled to debut on September 25, and producer Keiji Sasahara said they are trying to get that event as a prime-time show, based on having both Kid Yamamoto and Kazushi Sakuraba fight. The Aoki submission and the Manhoef fight were exciting, but so many of the Japanese favorites weren't booked, and there was nothing resembling the great up-and-down battles Dream is known for. 1. Kazuhiro Nakamura, 15-10, beat Karl Amasu, 11-3, and 2, by easy decision. Amasu has the 2010 version of the Vanderlei Silva stare-down. He came out throwing kicks until Nakamura, making his debut here, took him down. Nakamura scored with some punches, but did little damage. Amasu got to his feet, but Nakamura did better in the stand-up as well. Amasu tried a takedown, but Nakamura blocked and landed on top. He did decent ground and pound for several minutes, and was keeping busy. They gave Amasu a yellow card for stalling and ordered a stand-up that really there was no reason for. Time ran out in the 10-minute first round, In the second round, Nakamura went for a takedown and Amasu held the ropes to avoid going down. But when the ref ordered him to let go, he ended you on his back. Amasu wasn't able to get up. He tried a triangle. Nakamura was punching hard from the top, and Amasu was punching and going for submission from the bottom. They stopped the match, gave Nakamura a yellow for stalling, which was totally ridiculous, and ordered a stand-up even though both were providing action on the ground. Amasu landed a few shots but Nakamura came back with strong body shots, got a takedown, and time ran out. 2. Mitsuhiro Ishida, 19,6 and 1 beat DJ Taiki, 11,7 and 3, by a unanimous decision. This was Ishida's debut at featherweight, moving from lightweight. Taiki's real name is Taiki Hata. Ishida entered the Takada dojo years ago with his goal of becoming a pro wrestler, but wound up here. He's a wrestler who constantly goes for takedowns, which was the story of the fight. Ishida was punching from the top, transitioned into an armbar, but Taiki escaped and got to his feet. That was the best action so far. Taiki wanted to start punching but Ishida shot in for the takedown and put him back on the ground. He moved to side control, then got his back and kept him down the rest of the round. Announcer Michael Schiavello described round 1 as Ishida having more control than an episode of Get Smart. Second round was the same. Ishida took him right back down. Taiki threw punches and palms which ended up bloodying up Ishida's left ear. Both guys were punching hard, Ishida from the top and Taiki from the bottom. Taiki got up once in the second round, but was put right back down. 3. Michihiro Amagawa, 11,8 and 1 beat Young Sang-jun, 7 and 4, with a guillotine in 7:31. Amagawa got a big reaction for his debut with Dream after being on the Sengoku team on the New Year's Eve show. This was booked as a squash but Young survived longer than expected. Amagawa rocked Young standing and decked him. He followed with hard punches on the ground but Young hung tough and recovered. Amagawa took Young down and got the guillotine for the win. 4. Tetsuya Mizuno, 8 and 5, beat Melvin Manhoef, 24, 8 and 1, in 7:38. Manhoef only weighed 198 in a 205-pound weight class tournament. He was giving up a lot of height and weight to Mizuno, who got to make 205. Manhoef came out throwing big punches and landing. Mizuno was able to take the solid shots because of the size difference. Manhoef rocked him and put him down with a right, and then throwing hard punches on the ground trying to finish. But Mizuno recovered on the ground and suddenly that's now where Manhoef wanted to be. Manhoef got back up. Mizuno shot in and took Manhoef down at the 3:30 mark of the round. He scored with punches from the top, knees on the ground and went for an armbar. Manhoef escaped and got to his feet. They traded punches but Manhoef was now gassing and Mizuno hurt him with punches and suddenly was destroying him. Manhoef ended up falling to where he was under the ropes, thus couldn't move and getting pounded, another disadvantage of this being in a ring. He was just about finished with the punches when Mizuno got the Kimura for the submission. 5. Shigeru Musashi, 29, 3 and 1 beat Jake O'Brien, 13 and 4 in 31. O'Brien went for the takedown, and while trying to get it while Musashi had his back on the ropes, his neck was left open and Musashi got the guillotine far too easy for the submission. 6. JZ Calvin, 15, 3 and 1, real name Jesus Cavalcante, beat Katsunori Kikuno, 13, 3 and 2, via split decision. The first round was even with Kikuno generally doing better on the stand-up but Calvin got the takedowns. He got a mount but Kikuno was able to escape from there. Kikuno got a takedown with a leg trip late in the round. In the second round, Calvin got the takedown, got mount and then back position. He was working for a choke, which he never got. But he locked on a body scissors and Kikuno was stuck there most of the round. Calvin seemed to be the obvious winner and even the Japanese crowd booed the judge who gave it to Kikuno. 7. Shinya Aoki, 24 and 5, won no contest, beat Tatsuya the Crusher Kawajiri, 25,6 and 2, in 153. Aoki went for a takedown and Kawajiri blocked it, but in doing so Aoki grabbed the ankle and locked in a heel hook. Kawajiri couldn't escape but Aoki didn't quite have it locked and took about 90 seconds with the hold on before Kawajiri would tap. At one point Kawajiri threw a kick with his free foot to Aoki's left eye, leaving it swollen, but Aoki held on. Kawajiri was hurt bad and he ended up having to be carried from the ring to the back, with the preliminary news that he suffered a broken ankle. Aoki said that he knew Kawajiri wouldn't tap short of breaking a bone. Aoki then ended the show doing an interview, claiming he would get a shot at Gilbert Melendez, as well as announcing his engagement. His fiancée was at ringside. The World Wrestling Council's 37th anniversary weekend just took place, complete with the group's traditional top show of the year, The Aniversario event on July 11th at the Ruben Rodriguez Coliseum in Bayamon, before nearly 5,500 fans. After all the hype, including an angle on a popular non-wrestling television talk show involving Carlos Colon and Savio Vega, where Vega made fun of Carlito for having drug issues to set up their match, the deal for Carlito versus Vega ended up falling through. Instead, they said Carlito would face 3 mystery opponents, making people think Vega would be one of them, even though they never mentioned the name. Apparently what happened is Vega has asked for WWC to do an EVA invasion, and WWC only wanted Vega to wrestle Carlito but didn't want to do the invasion. That made sense because the invasion would put the EVA, which is far behind in popularity, at the same level and could bring back interest in them or get them back in the game. 1. Chris Joel won the Puerto Rican title open challenge to make him the top contender for the Puerto Rican heavyweight title. 2. Hiram Tua pinned former headliner Noriega. 3. Black Pain, Jose Torres, the former WWE developmental wrestler, pinned 56-year-old Tony Atlas in 5 minutes. Apparently the match was awful. Well, Atlas wasn't even any good 30 years ago, so what can you expect from him today? 4. Shelton Benjamin surprisingly pinned Primo Colon in a strong match. 5. Mickie James pinned ODB. James was overstrong. 6. Ray Gonzalez won the held-up Universal title by pinning Scott Steiner. Benjamin did a run-in to help Steiner, but was stopped by special referee El Tres Veces Mega Campeon. The name Ricky Banderas aka Macias goes by here, since AAA owns the rights to the Macias name and EVA owns the rights to the Ricky Banderas name. 7. Orlando Colon pinned Carlitos to win the Puerto Rican title. This was a surprise since Orlando Colon is under contract to WWE. Carlitos is not Carlito, but a wrestler who actually was brought in years ago as a job guy by EVA to make fun of Carlito. Then he turned into probably the best worker on the island. WWE had a deal with Carlito and Primo as well as Orlando that they could do 2 shows per year with WWC because WWE has good relations right now with Carlos Colon. 8. Thunder and Lightning won the tag team titles in a 3-way over former champions Abbott and Idol Stevens as well as Chicano and BJ. 9. Carlito was advertised as facing 3 different opponents in the main event. However, this ended up a mess. The first secret opponent was announced as Orlando Colon. But Orlando Colon refused to take the match, saying he wouldn't wrestle his cousin. The second match was against Booker T, the only name of the 3 advertised ahead of time. The finish saw Orlando Colon come out and give Carlito a chair. Carlito refused the chair. Orlando kicked the referee. Carlito then gave Orlando the backstabber. With the referee down, El Tres Veces Mega Campeon, Banderas, came in to referee. Then announcer Hugo Savinovich hit the ring telling Mega Campeon that he had no right to referee the match. Mega Campeon then laid out Savinovich with a chair shot, and then hit Carlito with a chair shot. He raised Booker T's hand then announced he was ruling Booker T as the winner of the match via DQ. So he turned heel. Carlito versus Booker was said to be not much of a match. Then Mega Campeon announced he was the 3rd opponent, and immediately pinned Carlito after a frog splash. He then grabbed the apple that Carlito brought to the ring, bit a piece and spit it on Carlito, and said that by beating Carlito, it showed he was the best of all the Puerto Rican wrestlers. So this should start a program between the 2 of them. The original plan here was Carlito versus Savio Vega, but negotiations fell through at the end. The report going around was Vega wanted an EVA invasion angle and WWC turned it down, and at that point Vega pulled out of the show even though he had shot the angle with Carlos Colon on a popular non-wrestling television show. Raw on July 11th did a 3.33 rating and 4.80 million viewers. The show did a 2.64 in males 18 to 49 and 68% of the viewers were male. I consider it a good sign because there was a ton of competition and Raw was only number 5 on cable in its time slot for the night. Home Run Derby, which in the past has hurt the Raw number, did a 4.6, down from a 6.0 last year, as sports competition. In the segment by segment, the John Cena Open with Nexus building up the main event did a 3.2. Gail Kim vs Alicia Fox did a 3.0. Usos and Tamina vs Hart Dynasty and Natalya did a 3.0. Backstage stuff like Nexus beating on Yoshitatsu, and an angle with Ted DiBiase, Maurice and John Morrison did a 3.2. The first Florence Henderson segment with Santino and William Regal did a 3.1. Edge vs Randy Orton did a 3.5, gaining about 576,000 viewers. Nexus beat down on John Morrison and The Miz vs Mark Henry did a 3.4. The Team Regal vs Team Santino match did a 3.4. And the John Cena vs. Nexus match, which was the overrun, did a 4.1, gaining about 865,000 viewers. Impact on July 8 did a 1.14 rating and 1.45 million viewers. The number is astounding considering the second hour went against the LeBron James decision on ESPN. That did a 7.0 rating, and the actual quarter where he made his decision did a 10.6 in males 18 to 34 and 13.1 million viewers. The feeling was that would hurt TNA significantly, and instead the rating was up 0.15 from usual. The show did a 0.8 in both males 18 to 34 and males 35 to 49. The new viewers didn't come in the target demo, as males 18 to 34 was essentially even with the week before and 35 to 49 were down. In the segment by segment, AJ Styles vs. Kazarian and Daphne vs. Angelina Love gained 51,000 viewers. The segment building up 3D and Jesse Neal gained 25,000 viewers. RVD vs. Samoa Joe actually lost 25,000 viewers. However, Joe laying out the ref and the beginning of Douglas Williams vs. Jeremy Buck gained 76,000 viewers going against the ESPN James stuff. The ending of Williams vs. Buck and Machine Guns and Hernandez vs. Matt Morgan and Beer Money match lost 51,000 viewers. The Jay Lethal/Ric Flair promo gained 76,000 viewers. The show peaked at 1.21, gaining 25,000 viewers for Jeff Hardy vs. Mr. Anderson. If nothing else, the general pattern start to finish was up, which is the sign that the people were at least not tuning out in any great numbers, which says a lot considering the competition. It was one of the better TNA television shows of the year, but to me, the strongest thing on the show was RVD vs. Joe, which went early and didn't do all that well. Superstars on July 8 did a 0.64 rating and 715,000 viewers for the first run and 0.2 and 146,000 viewers for the replay. Half-Print Brawlers, airing after Impact, did a 0.57 rating and 693,000 viewers. NXT on July 6 did a 0.83 rating and 1.13 million viewers. Raw on July 5 did a 3.35 rating and 4.81 million viewers. In the segment by segment, the opening segment with the Nexus interview and the faces and heels coming out did a 3.4. Ted DiBiase vs. John Morrison did a 3.0, the low point of the show. Vladimir Kozlov and Santino Marella vs. William Regal and Great Khali and the Steamboat footage and Arnold Anderson/Sheamus interview did a 3.2. The Miz vs. R-Truth injury angle did a 3.1. The Cutting Edge segment with Chris Jericho did a 3.4. Edge and Jericho vs. Randy Orton and Evan Bourne also did a 3.4. Backstage segments with Orton and Nexus, Usos and Tamina and Alicia Fox did a 3.3. Eve Torres vs. Alicia Fox did a 3.4. The final angle with Cena, Wade Barrett and Darren Young at the end did a 4.1, which meant it gained roughly 1 million viewers. Of course, most of that would be people tuning in for the next show since they had a long overrun period. The prelims of UFC 116 on July 3 did a 1.0 rating and 1.3 million viewers, doing a 1.11 in males 18 to 34 and 0.97 in males 35 to 49. It was second on cable during its time slot in both demos behind Racing on TNT. Still, prelims for such a major show, the audience was in 6th place out of the 8 prior 1-hour prelim specials, and down from the 1.6 million for the Evans vs. Jackson prelims. The UFC weigh-in on July 2 did a 0.6 rating and 645,000 viewers. SmackDown on June 25 did a 1.7 rating and 2.84 million viewers. Dragon Gate. They ran their big summer show in Kobe on July 11, drawing a sellout 9,300 fans, as Masato Yoshino used the Sol Naciente at 31:30 to beat Yamato and win the Open the Dream Gate title. Shingo Takagi pinned BXB Hulk with the last falconry in 25:55 in a hair versus hair match, and Hulk got his head shaved when it was over. K-Ness and Susumu Yokosuka retained the Open the Twin Gate titles, beating Masaaki Mochizuki and Don Fuji. Shima and Gamma and Genki Horiguchi beat Osaka Pro Wrestling's Black Buffalo and Tiger's Mask and the Bodyguard to keep the Open the Triangle Gate title. They also had a 4-way elimination match where Naruki Doi and Pac won over Dragon Kid and Ryo Saito, Kagetora and Cyber Kong and Tozawa and Nozawa. Tozawa and Nozawa and Kagetora and Kong were the first teams eliminated, and the finish saw Pac pin Saito after a shooting star press. There was also a 2-on-4 comedy match where Akebono and Abdullah the Butcher formed a winning tag team, doing a double elbow drop for the finish. In the weekend pay-per-view rundown last week, when we mentioned it was Pac's US debut, we meant US pay-per-view debut. Obviously it wasn't his US debut since the show was in Canada, and he had worked in Chikara in the past. They ran Korakuen Hall on July 8 featuring a three-way trios match on to where DOI and Yoshino and Hulk won over Dragon Kid and Horiguchi and Saito and Takagi and Yamato and Cyber Kong. The Horiguchi trio was eliminated first and Yoshino pinned Kong in 29-39. On the undercard, former Noah wrestlers Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Makoto Hashi lost to Masaki Mochizuki and Don Fuji. A note on Brody Lee, who debuted on the pay-per-view that aired over the weekend. Lee, who got the name from Bruiser Brody, who he tries to emulate as a big bearded long-haired brawler, is John Huber of Rochester. They announced this week signing a TV deal in France. Here and there. There is a ton of talk within wrestling regarding a new promotion that is based in Florida that has signed 30 to 40 wrestlers, insisting on them signing confidentiality clauses to keep them from talking about it. The promotion is going to be run by Pete Crofties and Sean Davis, who are listed as the co-owners. Crofties is a former independent promoter in Florida whose nephew is a wrestler. Davis is a Florida independent wrestler. The money financing is coming from Milton Wilpon, a member of the Wilpon family that has ownership in the New York Mets. Other names associated with the project are Kevin Kleinrock, who is involved with Wrestling Society X, and Mr. St. Laurent, who has run shows in Florida for years with the I Believe in Wrestling promotion based in Orlando. The wrestlers have signed contracts that in many cases kick in during September and October, and have strong benefits packages involved that TNA and WWE contracts don't have. The company is trying to keep the names confidential because there are names being talked with whose WWE contracts are expiring or who are under contract to TNA, including one major TNA name whose deal is set to expire soon. They have signed or are going after several of the top Ring of Honor names, with the idea of being competition with TNA. Whether they will access to the kind of money needed to go against TNA is a question, but like with every national MMA company, until there is the signing of a television deal, there's really nothing to it on a national basis yet. The one person who had been in talks with them was skeptical, noting how difficult it is to get television in the current environment, noting how Eric Bischoff, who has experience in marketing television shows, a past track record in high-profile wrestling, and had Hulk Hogan as his ace card, was never able to get a television deal for a promotion, and that's why they had to broker the deal with TNA if they wanted to be involved in the business, noting they got a reality show greenlit by CMT which then didn't renew them after the first season. There hasn't seemed to be any interest among the major cable stations in wrestling, and the second-tier stations like your Fox Sports Net types are going to require you to pay heavy for being on, and the only economic way to make it work is have TV paying you. Clownrock has been trying to get a Lucha Libre group going in the US for years, so I expect attempts to bring in talent from Mexico. Names that can be confirmed as signed since they are not working for other groups right now include Too Cold Scorpio, Sean Waltman, and Vader. Shane Douglas, Just Incredible, Sabu and TJP are other names that have been talked with seriously. If there is a key difference, it is this group is adamant about limiting the power of writers, never scripting interviews, and trying to give it more of a legitimate feel using promotional concepts from modern MMA and HBO boxing as well as old pro wrestling. UFC. We don't have an official number yet. Well, nothing we can report just yet, but it would be safe to say UFC 116 will be the third biggest pay-per-view event in company history, doing a little over 1 million buys. As noted last week, because of the nature of the buying pattern, this was a tough one to estimate, but was told they can safely say it's ahead of every show except UFC 100 and the Evans-Jackson show. Trending patterns in both the US and Canada indicate numbers much larger than Evans-Jackson, for what that is worth. We don't have paid paper and total in the MGM Grand Garden Arena, but the gate was $4,053,990, which would be number 10 in UFC history. Oakland on August 8 is about 8,500 paid for $1.3 million, and Boston on August 29 is about 11,000 paid for $2.4 million. Given that there are 6 weeks to go and they haven't even started the big local push, Boston is probably going to be sold out without any papering. Brock Lesnar's jiu-jitsu coach, Rodrigo Comprido Medeiros, said that Lesnar would enter the Abu Dhabi World Submission Championships in the near future. He felt that nobody would tap him, and because of his wrestling, he'd outpoint everyone. Both Mark Kerr and Ricardo Arona have won the Abu Dhabi World Championships in the past without actually submitting people, but simply getting the takedowns and winning via points. Ben Askren, who is probably a better wrestler than Lesnar, but even less experienced in MMA, won a gold medal at the Grappling Championship, so the idea of a high-level wrestler crossing over and dominating JJ guys at their own game largely via submission defense is not unheard of. Cain Velasquez won a World JJ title only 1 year into JJ training, although that was in the blue belt division and not overall. In the UK, UFC 116 week produced 8 on ESPN UK's 10 highest rated shows. Still, the show itself did 42,000 total viewers, airing at 3 a.m., less than the total number of viewers the major wrestling shows do, on stations with far more clearance. UFC 119 on September 25 in Indianapolis will have the Nogueira brothers in the double main event. Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira faces Frank Mir in a rematch of their 2008 match, and Antonio Rogerio Nogueira faces Ryan Bader. I'm just looking for the finish where Mir is beating the crap out of Rodrigo. Ed Soares distracts the ref and Rogerio runs in and guillotines him. Also interesting because Rodrigo Nogueira was Bader's coach on Tough and the two remained pretty close after the show. The original idea for this show was to headline with Lyoto Machida versus Quinton Jackson and Rogerio Nogueira versus Rashad Evans, but both Jackson and Evans turned down the fight. There was also an attempt to get Brock Lesnar versus Cain Velasquez as the main event, but it would have been impossible because Lesnar's cuts aren't going to heal up for a few weeks, and he wants a full 8-week camp. He also wants time off to work on his farm and be with his family and all the other things a guy who just did a babyface turn does. That date was really pushing it even if he came out unscathed, but when you run that many shows and you have so few champions and main eventers, sometimes you're going to need favors from guys and quick turnarounds. Jackson was wanting Rogerio Nogueira, but I guess they are still working on getting him against Machida. Machida was wanting Evans and manager Ed Soares asked for it to be an interim title match since Shogun Rua won't be back until March. Evans doesn't want to fight until March. There is talk now of matching Jackson with Forrest Griffin when Griffin fully recovers from shoulder surgery. Rodrigo Nogueira has been wanting Mir again since he was in poor shape due to a knee injury and a staph infection in the first fight that Mir beat an almost zombie-like Nogueira. Georges St. Pierre floated the idea of retirement this past week in an appearance on the MMA Junkie radio show. St. Pierre has always said that his goal is to fight until it's no longer fun because he's already financially stable. He also has said his goal is by the time he retires he wants to be regarded as the greatest pound-for-pound fighter in the history of the sport. On a radio appearance, St. Pierre talked about the idea of slowly adding lean muscle mass to where he could compete as a middleweight, and if he was to then beat Anderson Silva. And the thing is, Anderson Silva is 35 and if it takes 2 years to make the match, Silva may start to slide. He would have no more worlds to conquer. Mark Hunt also debuts on the September 25th show against Sean McCorkle, 9-0 in Midwest fights, having just signed a 4-fight contract, but has never fought anyone of note. McCorkle, a 6-6, 325-pounder now cutting to get within reach of 265. Hunt may be the first and last fighter in history to debut while being on a 5-fight losing streak, all losses in the first round, to Fedor Emelianenko, Josh Barnett, Alistair Overeem, Melvin Monhof, and Jagar Mousasi. Yes, a heavyweight whose last 2 losses were in a combined 98 seconds to a so-so middleweight and a very good light heavyweight. The deal appears to be that Hunt, 36, who hasn't won a fight since beating Tsuyoshi Kosaka more than 4 years ago, had a guaranteed contract with Pride. UFC didn't want to pick up the contract 3 years ago. Things happened, that they are now, 3 years later, honoring his contract. Other fights on the show look to be Sean Shirk vs Evan Dunham, Matt Serra vs Chris Lytle, rematch of a dreadfully dull match in the Tough Season 4 finals which really could have gone either way, Melvin Guillard vs Jeremy Stevens, CB Dollaway vs Joe Dirksen, Joey Beltran vs Matt Mitrione, Pat Dinwood, 9-0-1, a lightweight, debuts on the show, looking like it'll be against Aaron Riley, TJ Grant vs Julio Paulino and Steve Lopez vs Waylon Lowe. The company also reached out of court settlements with 500 different companies and individuals for pirating the pay-per-view events, both airing them in establishments without authorization, or companies that provided illegal website streams of pay-per-view events. The main event for UFC 120 October 16 in London, which will be a free Spike show, looks to be Michael Bisping vs Yoshihiro Akiyama, which if nothing else looks to be an exciting fight on paper. It'll be interesting for London to see if Bisping and Dan Hardy versus Carlos Condit, as the headliners can sell the show without a Randy Couture, especially since Condit is a good fighter but not really a big star, and Akiyama has super charisma but I don't know how over he is to the UFC audience as far as a guy headlining a show. It's not so much the loss in his last match, because he gained more by losing than most fighters will with a win, but just because he's only had 2 UFC fights and people sort of know him now from the Leben fight. Nobody remembers the Belcher fight, but not enough for his name in the main event meaning a lot. London is a tough city. For one thing, they've run multiple times, and for UFC, coming back to the same arena is usually tough. Bisping was a huge deal in Manchester, which sold out, and Hardy became a name due to St. Pierre even though he lost every round, but that show also had Couture as the big draw. Uriah Faber pulled out of the August 18 fight with Takeya Mizugaki in Las Vegas due to a knee injury suffered on July 5. Faber said he had been training at full intensity and his leg had completely healed from the Jose Aldo fight, and the knee injury wasn't related to the previous injury from the low kicks. Mizugaki isn't going to fight on this show now, which sounds to me that they will try and do the match when Faber is ready. Dana White at the last show said that Chuck Liddell talked with him and said when he saw the show open he got all motivated about wanting to write again. White said he hopes Liddell makes the right decision, either retire, but that he doesn't know if he's going to. The Korean Zombie, Chan Sung-young's opponent on the September 30th show in Broomfield, Colorado, will be George Roop. Rafael Nadal, 12-2, who knocked out Travis Lutter on the Musin pay-per-view show, signed a 4-fight deal. Spike officially announced the September 15th show from Austin, Texas, which airs prior to the debut of Season 12 of Tough. The 4 TV matches are Damian Maia vs. Alan Belcher in a middleweight bout. Belcher beat Patrick Cote via submission and Wilson Gouveia in his prior 2 fights, and really should have gotten a decision over Yoshihiro Akiyama. He lost the fight before that. As already noted, Mac Danzig vs. Matt Wyman will be the semifinal, plus Cole Miller vs. Ross Pearson and Jim Miller vs. Gleison Tebow. Kyle Kingsbury vs. Jared Hammond has been added as a prelim. I'd guess this as a must-win for both, almost surely for Kingsbury. After suffering a broken left arm in his win over Chuck Liddell on June 12, Rich Franklin isn't expected back in action until the end of the year. The Sydney Morning Herald ran a story about UFC and George Soteropoulos attempting to get Melbourne opened up. Melbourne is the hottest city in Australia when it comes to UFC ratings, and the claim was 47% of the tickets sold for the first show in Sydney actually came from the Melbourne metro area, which is about 450 miles away. If the company had its choice, next year's pay-per-view from Australia, tentatively scheduled for February, would be in Melbourne, but right now that's not possible. They are pushing the idea that a UFC event in Melbourne, between ticket sales, money spent by tourists, etc., would bring $15 million to the local economy. The day after Lesnar's win over Carwin, Frank Mir was in the gym with Freddie Roach, Georges St. Pierre and his head trainer Jimmy Gifford watching the tape, and they claim they found holes in Lesnar's game and that Mir will knock Lesnar out if they face again. Mir has decided if he fights Lesnar, he will come in at 245, and not make the mistake Carwin made of trying to be as big and as strong as Lesnar. He got as low as 225 to see if he could make light heavyweight, found out that was as low as he could get, and by last week he was 252. When mentioning Judge Cecil Peoples and leg kicks not counting, the full context of the quote regarding the first Lyoto Machida vs. Shogun Rua fight was, first of all, what you need to understand is that from where the judges are sitting, we get to see things that the fans at home may miss. Mauricio Rua was being aggressive, but it wasn't effective aggressiveness, which is what we as the judges look for when scoring a fight. The way I saw it, Lyoto was landing the more cleaner and damaging strikes throughout the fight. If you take a look at the judging criteria, clean strikes are valued more so than the quantity of strikes landed. Although Rua threw a lot of low kicks, they were not as damaging as Lyoto's diverse attack in the earlier rounds, which is why I scored the first 3 rounds for Machida. You have to keep in mind we always favor the fighter who is trying to finish the fight, and leg kicks certainly don't do that. When both fighters are engaged in a striking match, what I always look for is the fighter who is being judicious, picking his spots, being accurate and landing the cleaner strikes, which ultimately is what Lyoto did more effectively than Rua. Lyoto made Shogun come after him. He determined where the fight took place, which in my opinion constitutes as effective octagon control. That line led to a hilarious joke because later in the year, Quinton Jackson on Tough beat the hell out of the door in the UFC gym when he lost his temper, and the joke was the judges gave the door 10 and 9 because the door forced Jackson to come to it, meaning the door had effective control of where the fight was taking place. I recognize the fact that Rua did have a few takedown attempts during the course of the fight, however Lyoto defended them all successfully, which counts as effective grappling in his favor, whereas unsuccessful takedown attempts are not scored at all. Paul Taylor vs. Sam Stout looks to be set for October 23 at the Honda Center at Anaheim. The A-Team with Quinton Jackson was number 9 at the box office over the weekend, taking in $1,752,421 for a 5-week total of $73,923,594. It now looks like Miguel Torres will face Charlie Valencia on September 30th in Broomfield, Colorado, as he begins his comeback. The Jose Aldo Jr. vs. Manny Gamburian featherweight title match talked about as the main event has apparently been verbally agreed to by both sides. Right now they appear short of main events, as there's nothing for the September and October shows, with no champions available until probably November and possibly longer depending on when Brock Lesnar wants to return. The light heavyweight title is out of play until March, Shogun's knee surgery. The middleweight title is probably out of play until December after the August 7 fight. The welterweight title is out until mid-December because of Tough. The lightweight title is out of play until December or January after the August 28 fight. It doesn't help that as of last week, there were 30 fighters on the roster unavailable due to injuries. Nick Catone vs. Tomas Derval and John Gunderson vs. Efren Escudero are scheduled for September 15 in Austin, Texas. Escudero, as a tough winner and this being a Spike show, is likely to be in a featured match. At James McSweeney dropping from heavyweight to 205 versus Tom Blackledge to the October 16 show in London. What could be a real sleeper on the show with two good strikers on that undercard has Cyril Diabate versus Alexander Gustafsson. Tough 11 winner Court McGee's first fight since taking the tournament looks to be on the October 23 show against Ryan Jensen. Paul Taylor vs. Sam Stout also look to be on the Anaheim undercard. They're trying to put together a Cowboy Donald Cerrone vs. Jamie Varner match on the September 30th show in Broomfield, Colorado, which makes sense since Cerrone grew up in the area and it's a grudge match they've been wanting to bring back for 18 months. The only question is Varner's recovery from his injuries in the Kamal Shalaris fight. WWE. We don't have a lot new on Ricky Steamboat other than he was in good spirits, but at press time was still hospitalized in Tampa. He may be hospitalized as long as another week. He's expected to be off for about a month before returning to work. The impression we have is that he'll be taken off the road and be based in Tampa as a trainer for developmental talent. He's got a good rep as a trainer, and even before his hospitalization, there was talk of taking him off the road and having him based full-time in Tampa working hands-on with the talent there. The latest medical word is that it can't be proven conclusively one way or another if the beating he took in the angle was or wasn't related to his medical condition. The Triple H vs. Sheamus match at SummerSlam, which was expected to be one of the key main events on the show, now looks to be off since Triple H had surgery to repair a torn muscle tendon in his arm this past week. The surgery was being kept secret, however. Dirk Hayard of the Toronto Blue Jays, who is rehabbing in Alabama, saw him coming out of surgery and noted he was next to him on the training table. He wrote on July 8 that he saw Triple H fresh out of surgery. We don't have details on whether it was a biceps or triceps tear, which would most likely have taken place while filming a movie or doing something else outside the ring since he hasn't wrestled in months. The only word we had is that he had a partial, and not a full-blown tear. It's probably smart to get it taken care of, although most guys work through partial tears. He also had his shoulder cleaned out. The surgeries were minor and he's expected out right now 2 to 4 months. But we're told he's off the books for SummerSlam. Punk is expected out for about another month. He had floating particles in his elbow which was causing it to lock up and needed cleaning via minor surgery. Shane McMahon's first known business move since leaving WWE was to invest in a group called International Sports Management in the UK. ISM is a group based in Cheshire, UK, which represents many top British sports stars, most notably in golf and cricket. The plan to use the new capital it has gotten from McMahon, as well as several others that were formerly involved with Satana Sports. To build their business in the US, they are looking at shortening up golf tournaments to try and capitalize on the success cricket has had in the UK. Ziggler, not MVP as reported here last week, is the final guy in the SmackDown ladder match. We got an incorrect results from the SmackDown match on Deadline last week. The July 18th Money in the Bank show in Kansas City, which is far from sold out, has so far announced Sheamus vs. Cena for the WWE title in a cage, Mysterio vs. Swagger for the world title, the Raw Money in the Bank match with Orton, Miz, Warren, Edge, Jericho, Morrison, DiBiase and Henry, the SmackDown Money in the Bank match with Kingston, Show, Rhodes, Hardy, Christian, Kane, McIntyre and Ziggler, Hart Dynasty vs. Usos for the tag title, Layla vs. Kelly for the women's title and Fox vs. Torres for the Divas title. The announcement of the October 23 Lesnar vs. Velasquez pay-per-view date is hardly good news here. The WWE Bragging Rights pay-per-view is scheduled for October 24 in Minneapolis. This has a strong chance, unless WWE does a great job of building the show, as doing one of the company's lowest numbers ever. A combination of the bragging rights concept, which bombed last year, and the only thing worse for WWE than having a Lesnar pay-per-view the night before their show is having a Lesnar pay-per-view against a Hispanic contender. UFC doesn't hurt WWE's international buys at all, but it's had huge impact on the US and particularly Canadian buys. Apparently the plan is for someone major to be revealed as the person behind Nexus. The main people being pitched for heel turns are Triple H and Cena. Cena would be the more gutsy move because you'd be risking the attendance of the large kids contingent that he brings, and his merchandise money. Triple H has wanted to turn heel for a few years, but injuries, both to him and others, kept happening and it was never the right time. With Triple H out, nothing is solid right now for SummerSlam, which is August 22 in Los Angeles. Mysterio vs. Punk has been talked about, but it is not a lock. The idea of mask versus mask to expose Punk's head would make sense, but instead they had show unmask him this week on TV for free. Well, as long as they have a better idea for the pay-per-view, that's fine. The show had been planned to be built around Triple H and Undertaker returning. Among ideas pitched have been Morrison vs. DiBiase, with Melina returning as Morrison's second to counteract Maurice, Show vs. Swagger, which is already underway, continuing the Harts-Usos tag team feud. Even though Vince made the call of not wanting Finlay on television any longer due to his age, he is being booked on house shows, like with Goldust, to work with the younger talent. The feeling is rookies versus rookies doesn't help rookies advance, but that both Finlay on SmackDown and Goldust on Raw can be good teachers in the ring on house shows. In an interview on America Online Fan House, Dusty Rhodes talked like the July 9th match in Kissimmee, Florida, where he teamed with Sons Goldust and Cody Rhodes against Curt Hawkins and Trent Barretta and Kalen Croft, would be the last match of his career. Rhodes, at 64, hasn't wrestled since the bull rope match at the 2007 Great American Bash pay-per-view. No word yet on the new woman debuting on SmackDown. Rumor has it April Jeanette, who has been using the name AJ Lee. Her debut vignette was cut from this past week's SmackDown due to time constraints. Downfall with Chris Jericho on July 6 fell to a 2.1 rating and 3.8 million viewers. Not looking good for anything past the initial run. Lawler filed a lawsuit against Corey Macklin, the former Memphis wrestling promoter and television announcer, who is currently running for county clerk. Lawler claimed Macklin sold rights to Lawler's videotape library for $20,000 to Highspots, and that there is a 20-volume DVD set of old Memphis footage being sold now on the internet. Macklin's attorney, Ed Behrman, asked what proof does Lawler have that he owns the rights to those tapes. The ownership of the Memphis videotape library has been a subject of discussion for years, which is one of the reasons WWE doesn't own the rights, because of the question of where would they legally buy them from, plus most of the masters are gone and what exists is basically stuff people themselves have taped and saved in their own collections. The original promotion owned the rights. Lawler and Jerry Jarrett were 50% owners of the original Memphis promotion after Lawler made a power play to get co-ownership. In 1996, when the company started losing money, Jarrett, who always stated he wasn't in business to lose money, was about to close down the territory. At that time, Lawler came across a con man who used the name Larry Burton, and somehow Burton made contact with a group of investors in Cleveland who were willing to buy the promotion, thinking they could make a killing selling television ad revenue since the ratings for the show were strong and at the time it had some national syndication. Lawler kept the information from Jarrett and offered him $250,000 for his 50%. Jarrett jumped at the deal, thinking he was ready to shut down anyway. Lawler then sold his stock to a group called XL Sports, headed by Mike Selker, for a huge profit. I believe the price was $2 million, of which Lawler and Burton each got half. They quickly went bankrupt when they found they couldn't sell TV ads like Vince McMahon and others had told them they would be able to. The company ended up in bankruptcy court and later in civil court, where the investors claimed Lawler and Burton defrauded them. The judge presiding over the case actually told Lawler as the trial was going on that he should settle because the case didn't look good for him. Lawler, the golden talker that he is, took his chances with the jury, which ruled, somehow, that the Cleveland group had in fact been swerved, as much of the evidence showed, but that Lawler was not involved in the swerving, so they won their case and ended up getting no money. So one would think the bankruptcy court would own the intellectual property rights, such as the tape collection. There is no case for Macklin to own the rights that I can see. Macklin sent cease and desist letter to Lawler last month regarding not airing anything with Macklin on Lawler's new Memphis wrestling television show, which may have precipitated Lawler filing the suit for the $20,000 Macklin made from selling the tapes. Macklin was both the lead announcer, wrestled in some main events, and was the promoter of the previous incarnation of Memphis wrestling. He said that he wants to distance himself from Lawler based on Lawler doing business with people he wouldn't want to be associated with. Lawler said that he got Macklin his start in wrestling, had no plans of airing any footage with Macklin on his new show to begin with, and felt when Macklin sold the tapes, that he was being backstabbed by a friend. Macklin told the Memphis Commercial Appeal that the suit is politically motivated because Lawler supports the Republican candidate, Wayne Mashburn, in the race for Shelby County Clerk. Mashburn advertises on Lawler's television show. A few notes on the death of George Steinbrenner, the famous New York Yankees owner. Steinbrenner was a lifelong wrestling fan who frequently attended house shows in the Tampa area and sat in the front row during the 80s and 90s. He was friends with a lot of the wrestlers, and was particularly close to Bobby Heenan. Whenever Heenan wanted to attend a game in New York, he'd call Steinbrenner and get tickets in the owners. Once on a Saturday night's main event, when Terry Taylor was playing the Red Rooster, and Heenan was managing him, and Taylor was losing more than he was winning, Heenan went to Steinbrenner and asked him if he should fire the Rooster. I can recall Steinbrenner at the 1995 Royal Rumble the year Shawn Michaels won. He also did a skit at WrestleMania 7 debating instant replay in sports. Notes from the July 12 Raw show from Lexington. Actually, the most talked about thing on the show may have been the 20 seconds video open. WWE redid the open, with some changes. There were new clips added of Gorgeous George, who they are going to start promoting since they are doing a movie on his life and are going to market him going forward as the innovator or pioneer of sports entertainment, Buddy Rogers, Bobby Heenan, Harley Race, Miz, Bourne, and Sheamus. Reader Leon Peters noted that both Bruno Sammartino and superstar Billy Graham are out, which shouldn't be a surprise since both are considered enemies of the state. If anything, it was a surprise McMahon would put Sammartino in the first place, even given his importance in the history of the promotion. Graham, who McMahon used as the prototype of the type of wrestler he wanted to push, Hogan in particular, was cut in one of the company's cost-cutting moves. Gorilla Monsoon was removed, which is a surprise. There are different shots of Undertaker and Ultimate Warrior than before, but both remain in. Warrior is interesting because he's far less important historically than those removed, and has been more of a critic of McMahon than others. Also dropped were Lita, Shane McMahon and Kingston. This was the most full-scale open edit in a long time, although Hogan, Flair and Jeff Hardy were all removed in the last few months due to going to TNA. But by far the most talked about thing is that the voice of Jim Ross was replaced by that of Michael Cole. Ross noted on Twitter that he hadn't been told of it, but wasn't selling it as any big deal either. Far more notable is as the go-home show for a Cena vs. Sheamus cage match. For the second straight month, the big angle on television is Cena vs. Nexus, and the angle that closed the show was Cena and Sheamus joining forces against Nexus, yet the pay-per-view main event is Cena vs. Sheamus in a cage for the title. In that sense it felt like it was a TNA go-home show. The show opened with a dark match where Coble pinned Alex Riley. Riley opened the show doing a heel promo saying he was better than all the NXT rookies. For Superstars, the Bellas beat Hall and Maurice, and Jericho pinned Tatsu. A lot of chants for Jericho during the match. Tatsu once again did Flair chops, and the audience hooed. Tatsu is the only one allowed to do chops because he's Oriental, and in the McMahon version of pro wrestling, Orientals do chops. Seriously. At this point I have no clue why nobody else is allowed to, because I really can understand not wanting the crowd to go who, since he's on the opposition promotion and the crowd always does. But allowing a prelim guy with no push to do so, and then get that response, makes even less sense. Said to be a real good match, with the crowd really hot early. Tatsu was busted open accidentally, and they stopped the match cold to try and close his cut. Jericho pulled up a chair and sat in it in the ring while the trainers worked on Tatsu, and he was fake biting his nails. The stoppage we're told killed the flow of the match, and even though we were told the match was good, they never fully got the heat back. Raw opened with Cena out. He complained that in the brawl last week against Nexus, that Sheamus didn't show up. Well, none of the heels did. It's not like Edge and Jericho showed up. He did push the cage match, noting that he'd win the title and that nobody can interfere since it's a cage match, which would be an effective selling point, except that there has been tons of interference over the years in WWE cage matches. He mentioned it's 1-on-6 because he took Darren Young out. It was good for Young to be injured after taking maybe 1/3 the beating Cena took twice, and he came back both times without a scratch on him. Nexus came out, all wearing matching end t-shirts, which Cena made fun of. Showing that the mystery GM stuff being groaned at is not a Northeast thing, they booed every time the lights dimmed and the email sound played. The GM announced that if any WWE wrestler helped Cena in the main event, they'd be suspended for 90 days. But if the Nexus group doesn't obey tag team rules, they'd also be suspended for 90 days. Cena said things don't look good for him, but if he's going down, he's taking a few of them with him, which was a good line. Fox pinned Kim in 137 when she blocked Kim's Eat Defeat finisher and hit the axe kick. Torres was at ringside doing commentary. The best thing I can say is it was kept short. The GM announced Fox vs. Torres for the title on pay-per-view. Usos and Tamina beat Hart Dynasty and Natalya in 242 when Jay pinned Smith after a superkick and a splash off the top pretty darn clean. Well, at least that finish makes sense as a build for the title match on pay-per-view. It would make more sense if Cole and Lawler put over the obvious, that look what happened, and it gives them a big psychological edge going into the pay-per-view. They have the twins wearing different tights to tell them apart. Backstage, Barrett thanked Jericho for all his help in teaching. Matthews went up to Jarrett, but Jericho wouldn't talk. I think the idea is to tease who is behind Nexus for a while now. Nexus then confronted Tatsu for doing a run-in. Tatsu said Cena is my friend, and Otunga threw some knees and they all laid him out. DiBiase and Maurice came to the ring all dressed up. It's amazing how dressing like you're a big deal makes you seem like such a big deal. The only problem is, no matter how expensive clothes DiBiase wears, he's still boring on interviews. DiBiase talked about being the $1 million couple, which he then said was he and the briefcase that gets a title shot. Maryse wasn't happy about the put-down, but DiBiase told her she'd be swimming in presents. Morrison came out and did a lame promo where Maryse went off on him in French and he translated it all wrong. It was supposed to be funny, but they gave Morrison lame jokes so it died. DiBiase attacked Morrison, who made a comeback, and was about to deliver Starship Pain, but Maryse pulled DiBiase out of the ring to safety. Morrison landed on his feet on the move. Next came the first of 2 Brady Bunch parodies. It was silly that Florence Henderson was such a pro out there and was one of the older celebs, not quite like Bob Barker, but someone who played the audience great and didn't appear to take it like she was above doing wrestling. The live crowd seemed to really get a kick out of it. Morella would say things and there would be a laugh track like a 60s comedy. Then Regal came out, would say something much funnier and there would be no laugh track. Regal made a comment about the Partridge Family being better and Henderson got all mad. Morella noted about how arrogant Florence's son Ricky, former baseball star Ricky Henderson, was, which was funny. Henderson slapped Regal. Morella had the hots for Mrs. Brady, who is 76 years old. I think this was a parody on the idea that Greg Brady and Florence dated during the latter years of the show. Edge pinned Orton in 11:23 in a good match. Really liked the finishing sequence as Edge went for the spear, but Orton sidestepped him and punted him. I guess the moving punt isn't as devastating as the stationary punt since Edge got right up. Orton went for the RKO, but Edge escaped. Edge went for another spear and Orton schoolboyed him for a good near fall. Orton then used his version of the backbreaker. Jericho came out and distracted Orton and Edge used the Edge-O-Matic and got the pin. Then Jericho came out and gave Edge a codebreaker. Orton then gave Jericho an RKO. Bourne, who Orton had laid out with an RKO last week, came out looking for revenge, and landed a spin kick on Orton. He went up for the shooting star press but Orton dove back with this amazingly well-timed save, nailed him with the RKO. That should have been a main event match finish. Think Shawn Michaels' superkick on Shelton Benjamin years back. They showed replay after replay of the spot. Last week I thought it was silly that Bourne, but was starting to get momentum after beating Jericho, then lost to Jericho, was getting laid out in a situation where he didn't need to in a company that should have learned by now about false starts and pigeonholing talent. So they did it a second week, and then later in the show Bourne was laid out again by Nexus. Unless he's winning Sunday, this made no sense at all, even though it was a great spot. Miz came out and said he's on his run of hurting people. The GM then said Miz would face the newest guy in the Money in the Bank match, and said, "Just when you think you have all the answers, I change the questions." There was no reaction to that line, a Roddy Piper catchphrase, unlike last week where people did recognize the Steve Austin lines. Miz vs. Henry went 90 seconds. Henry went for a tackle on the floor and ran into the GM podium, knocking it down and knocking himself out. Miz then hit him with a rubber garbage can and poured the contents on him. The match just ended and they went to a break. They came back with a second Florence Henderson comedy segment, as she ring-announced Team Santino vs. Team Regal. Morella and Khali and Kozlov and Goldust beat Regal and Ryder and Primo and Doink the Clown, I think Nick Dinsmore, in 1:45. Regal was funny, acting like an 8-year-old, making faces and pretending he was going to jump Henderson. Henderson then put on Regal's ring jacket and pranced around on the floor. Morella then nailed Regal with his ridiculous Cobra, which Regal sold like he was shot. But Regal kicked out and it ended with a Khali chop on Doink. Morella then eyed Henderson, went for a kiss and she ducked away and started making out with Khali, while the announcers noted that they never saw Mike Brady, Robert Reed, who was gay in real life, making out with her on the Brady Bunch. There was also an argument where Cole said he had a crush on Jan Brady as a kid and Lawler talked about how Jan was the ugliest one. Edge did an interview and thanked Jericho for making sure he knew Money in the Bank was everyone for themselves. Now wait a minute, Jericho and Edge feuded on and off for months. Edge walked out on Jericho last week, and somehow Jericho helping him win but laying him out after as a wake-up call. Edge sold the idea he's been in more Money in the Bank matches than anyone and has won more of them than anyone. Bourne was still being treated for the RKO, groaning like he was in pain with an ice pack on his neck. Sheamus came out to bully him and pretty well punked him out. The Nexus group came and Sheamus told them how Bourne had been bad-mouthing them. He left and they destroyed Bourne again. Somehow Sheamus was back in the picture and they went up to him. He saw they were mad, so he took off and ran away, so completely out of character, a mad dash screaming for help from Cena. The 6-on-1 main event saw Nexus beat Cena in 7:17. Cena was holding his own early on Tarver and Gabriel. Then Slater, who wasn't legal, knocked Cena down from behind. Based on the opening segment, that should be a 90-day suspension for him, but it was ignored. Sheffield beat down Cena. Cena made a comeback on Barrett and had him up for the attitude adjustment, but Cena didn't see Barrett tag out to Sheffield. Sheffield nailed Cena with a clothesline, followed by Otunga tagging in with his urinage type move, and finally Gabriel hit the 450 on Cena for the pin. Cena then got up and grabbed a chair and used it to make a comeback. The guys were all circling Cena and ready to go after him when Sheamus ran in with a chair and they stood back to back, and that's where the show ended. Given that Cena is going for the title in the main event, Cena should have kicked out of the 450 to make him special, and then gotten pinned by Barrett's move, since Barrett is clearly going to be Cena's future singles opponent, and then beaten on for Sheamus to save. This way, Cena lost, but since he was right up, it was like he really didn't lose since he wasn't selling, and it isn't like Nexus gained any heat from the pinfall, and he wasn't being saved by Sheamus. Then again, it really doesn't matter because none of this leads to Cena versus Sheamus in a cage match. This all would have made sense had they done it next week, once they got the pay-per-view out of the way. Honest to God, between the booking of TNA and WWE, if it wasn't for UFC, people in wrestling would all be saying that pay-per-view is simply a dead industry. But at least WWE can still make great money off it when they book something people want to see, which makes booking TV that gives them a fixed income that doesn't go up or down depending on a tenth of a ratings point, and not having the TV lead to building the pay-per-view on the go-home show seem even more perplexing. Somewhere in here Cena started bleeding as there was a quick shot of his face all bloody, and then they wouldn't show another else up. After Raw ended, they did Cena and Orton versus Sheamus, you know, the guy who just saved Cena, and Edge. This is right up there with that show where the whole night they talked about how if anyone from either side touched each other they'd be gone, and as soon as TV ended, everything they were to be fired for, everyone did. Orton worked the first few minutes because the trainers worked on getting Cena to stop bleeding. Finally, when Cena's cut was closed, he got on the apron, got the hot tag, and won with the attitude adjustment on Sheamus. The funny thing happened after as a woman hit the ring and started hugging Cena. Security ran in to pull her off, and she wrapped herself around the ring ropes, and it took 3 guys to break her grip and drag her off. What was funny was as the security was trying to pull her off the ropes, Orton bent down like he was going to RKO her, and Cena acted like he was telling him not to do it. They had trouble earlier as a different woman was throwing stuff at Edge during his match with Orton. Rather than cause a scene, because it wasn't noticeable on TV,